Namaskar. 25 in cricket is a promising start. In Bollywood, it's Silver Jubilee. And to celebrate this quarter life moment for this podcast, we have a guest who knows a thing or two about quarters, specifically the quarterly earnings of the finance world and the creative quarters where culture is made. Welcome to the 25th episode of The Indian Ad Geek. My name is Vishal Mehra. Here's the thing about 25. It's old enough to know better. It's also young enough to still take risks, which funnily enough is also a pretty accurate description of Kulfi Collective. And my guest today is the co-founder and CEO of Kulfi. Welcome to the show, Advait. So good to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
How did you and advertising happen, Advait?
So, I think many people in advertising, it was a happy accident. I had no plans to start a career in advertising. Actually, I was quite well set in my plans to pursue a career in investment banking. Soon after college, I joined a mid-market investment bank in Bombay, spent 3 years there, then a couple of years as a venture capitalist at a venture capital firm, also in Bombay. Had my soul sucked out of me, and like most um, young Indians, I felt that the answer to my existential crisis would be an MBA. So while I was studying for my MBA, I was planning on giving my GMAT and planning on going abroad. I decided to I was giving my GMAT and Akshat, who's my younger brother, just come back from film school. So he came to me one day and he was like, I think you're better off using your Excel and PPT skills at helping me start something. So I said, okay, let's let's do this as an experiment. Let's give this a shot and see where it goes. So it started off as one short film contest that we participated in. We produced a short film for a contest that was being sponsored by Tata Chroma. We, by the good graces of Tata Chroma's judges, we won that short film contest. Tata Chroma, as winners, gave us 75,000 rupees worth of Chroma vouchers, which was obviously a princely sum at that point in time. We took that money, bought ourselves an iMac, and in September of 2012, basically bootstrapped our first venture from there. So I think Akshat was a big inspiration for me joining the advertising industry. Again, it was not intentional. I think we wanted to basically produce content, make and tell stories that we were excited by, and we realized that one way to pay the bills and keep the lights on was working with brands. So that's essentially how it started, and yeah, it's been 13 years since, and we've not looked back.
That's a great story. You now have a fairly large team at Kulfi. You've stayed bootstrapped when content companies around you were raising at crazy valuations. Now, with Divya Karani joining as chairperson, does the calculus change? Is Kulfi preparing for institutional scale?
So we've been bootstrapped and intentionally so. I think especially coming from like a finance background, I wanted to try and run the business as independently as possible, at least for a greater part of our journey as an organization. And that I think has paid its own dividends in many ways. Um, we do realize that like we've reached a certain stage and scale in our journey where we think that there is a larger opportunity, especially given what is happening with tech and data and like a whole bunch of other areas in our industry, and what can potentially be an opportunity if not harnessed in time could potentially even become a threat. So we do recognize that like we need to achieve some level of institutional scale. So Divya was the little bit of adult supervision that we think we needed in the room. And that's when we brought her on to just sort of guide us and give us a sense of um, you know what organizations at true scale operate at in this space. And that's what she's been doing. She's really been pivotal in helping us understand foundationally what we need to do in order for us to be able to actually sort of achieve scale. So yes, the intention is to get to institutional scale over the next few years, and try and sort of be one of the leading creative organizations coming out of this part of the world, that can have an influence on culture and building brands in the region. So yes.
My best wishes to you as you scale up.
Thank you.
You're not an ad agency, you're not a production house, you're not a creator management firm. When a CMO trained to think in those boxes sits across from you in a pitch, what's the hardest misconception, Advait, that you have to dismantle? And increasingly, it's not even the CMO you need to convince, right? Procurement is the real gatekeeper. They only speak in standardized hourly rates. How do you make the intangible value of a collective legible to somebody like that?
I think the bottom line is the work we do. That is really the most tangible outcome that we can sort of present, and it has been our greatest marketing tool over the last 13 years, continuously. So we invest heavily in making sure that the work we create actually has and delivers outcomes, not only for in terms of engagement and being spoken about, and acquiring the attention of various consumers that the brand wants to speak to, but it also sort of tries to deliver to certain business outcomes. And then that naturally becomes an easier conversation to have with procurement and with leadership within a brand. It doesn't mean that we still don't need to spend a lot of time educating brands about what we do. And you're right. We've also sort of evolved over the years in many shapes and forms. And today position ourselves as a creative studio that focuses on largely brands that want to build in culture. So our focus area is cultural relevance, and our belief is that brands that actually play a meaningful role in culture are the ones that can sort of win in this ecosystem. They have the ability to increase their share of voice. They can, withstand, more sort of inflationary pressures and deal with like an environment where they can actually engage with communities more deeply. So for us, we see this as a huge opportunity, and what we try and do and spend a lot of our time on is really trying to sort of help brands understand why it's important to become culturally relevant, and how we as an organization can deliver on that. And like I said, the crux and what sort of gets our foot in the door with most of these folks is the work we do. And that tends to really sort of make the conversation a lot easier because it already has delivered on certain outcomes for another brand. So therefore, it just becomes easier for us to be able to demonstrate proof of the fact that we can now do it for them too.
Advait, can you walk me through how a single Kulfi deal is actually structured? Project fee, retainer, rev share on IP. Most people in the industry still don't understand how a company that spans branded content, original IP, immersive experience keeps its commercial model coherent.
So it's all of the above. So it is a combination of the retainer engagements that get bundled up with project work that eventually get also bundled up with some level of upside in terms of rev share. So we have like all three revenue streams that are part of the kind of work we do. Obviously, the first two being a big chunk of what we do. We started off as a company that was focused on fundamentally producing content. So it was a very project heavy business. So to start with, a lot of the work we would do was, just producing films and producing branded content and coming in and out of engagements with brands, and just delivering on specific projects. In little after the pandemic, we decided that, that was not as value accretive as we would have liked it to be. That's a high margin business in itself, but has its own challenges in the sense that it tends to not deliver as much revenue visibility and create a compounding effect with the brand, because what you do is you get in and get out, and you don't necessarily over a period of time build a deeper relationship with the brand. And for us also, it wasn't great because at the beginning of the year, we were effectively resetting to zero when it came to, revenues. So somewhere around 2020, 2021, we decided to go deeper with brands and start, doing retainer work as well. And now we are a combination of the three sort of revenue streams that you mentioned. So it's basically retainer work that comprises of about 30 to 40% of revenues. The remaining 70, no, remaining about 60% is project-based work. And then about 10% is rev share, because we keep that as a very small pie because we don't want it to it de-risks the business a little bit, but it also sort of gives us a little bit of an upside if things go well. But increasingly, we are seeing that that last piece is going to become a very big part of our revenues over time. Just given the fact that now brands are also starting to become a lot more outcome oriented, and we see value in doing so. So we also feel that our incentives get aligned when we are, both in it to win it. And how we do it now is try and structure some upside by making sure that we deliver certain outcomes and then be able to take some sort of a revenue share on that.
Advait, you were just talking about that probably the deepest impact that you can make in the business is when you're talking to brands, keeping in mind the consumer culture, right? And you're able to make a bigger impact there. When brands come to you, are they arriving with a brief in hand? Are they arriving with a cultural problem, like you were talking about?
I think more often than not, at least, and the place we like to be in is when a brand comes to us with a business problem. We feel that it being able to deliver a business outcome uh, sort of validates the kind of value of the work we actually end up doing. Because creative work, and then when you talk about things like culture and other things, they tend to be very misunderstood, and they tend to, be disassociated with business outcomes, right? So, what tends to happen in a tough environment is that your marketing expenses are the first things that get slashed. But what we noticed in, like, recessionary environments is that if you're a good brand, you can actually sort of stand the test of time because of the fact that you've sort of gone ahead and made those investments, right? So our belief is that if we can actually sort of work with brands that come to us with very, very well-defined business problems, and the work we do can actually go ahead and achieve certain outcomes around those business problems and solve those business problems, that's where we see the most amount of value. So oftentimes brands come to us with that kind of a requirement. Obviously, we're seen for the work we do, so we also do have a fair amount of conversations that tend to happen ki midle ye viral video bana do, or make this one campaign for us, like the previous campaign that you did for X brand. But I think that those are the conversations that don't excite us as much as the kind of conversations where a brand comes to us with a business problem. So we seek that more often than not. Um, and then it's the typical journey. We treat that business problem as a brief, and we translate that into a strategy. And then we start picking and choosing which lanes we want to take in order for us to be able to actually start slowly and steadily delivering certain outcomes for those brands. We like to take a deep long-term view on multiple brands. So we've moved from a stage where we used to do projects with several brands to actually doing deeper engagements with a lot fewer. And we've obviously grown, multiple times in terms of revenue. So the amount of money that a brand spends on us today is significantly higher than what brands were spending earlier, because what we were doing was just specifically going wide with many versus deep with few. So that's really, where our focus area is as we speak at this point in time. And the nature of the engagement starts off with, piece of work that they've sort of seen that has delivered certain outcomes for another brand. They reach out to us with a specific business problem that they would like for us to solve for. We treat that with strategy, creative, and then eventually producing, some version of an object. It could be a film, it could be um, an experience. It could be actually creating an entire community or all of the above. And then what that work does in terms of outcomes is really where we spend a lot of our time trying to analyze so that it creates a flywheel. and it validates the fact that if it's solving a business problem, then you actually will come back with more to effectively try and sort of achieve better outcomes.
Would you be able to give a couple of examples of what you were just talking about?
We work with Spotify extensively. One of the pieces of, one of the primary engagements of Spotify today is to sort of increase, their uh, pool of subscribers on their platform. So their goal is to effectively try and be a platform of choice when it comes to listening to music, as well as, the vast podcast library that they have on their platform. And what they want to try and do is convert a large portion of the sizable number of free tier users that they have on the platform into subscribers. The challenge for a streaming service, especially an audio streaming service, is how do you effectively differentiate yourself from other audio streaming services, because the content that sits on any other streaming service is the same as the content that sits on the Spotify, right? So like I can listen to Bacha or Taylor Swift on Spotify, and I can listen to Bacha or Taylor Swift on any other streaming service. So part of what our goal in terms of premiumizing, which is essentially trying to help the consumer understand why Spotify adds value, is a couple of things. One is defining a strategy, and the business outcome that we want to sort of deliver is more users. What we've sort of arrived at with the team at Spotify is that the closer you bring the artist to the fan, the greater the amount of opportunity lies for an exchange of value. So you may not have users willing to spend 100 rupees a month to listen to Coldplay, but they will be willing to spend as much as 35,000 rupees on a ticket to fly down to Ahmedabad to actually sort of watch them play live, right? So the closer you bring the artist to the fan, the higher the exchange of value. And we feel that there are opportunities both offline and online for a platform like Spotify to be able to deliver that. So everything that we do, from the content that we produce, the communities that we build, the IP that we end up creating, is focused on fundamentally trying to bring artists closer to fans. Right? That's one larger goal, and helping Spotify play a role in culture in that manner. The second piece is IP. So how Spotify ends up differentiating itself extensively is by creating intellectual properties that um, um, audiences associate with, right? So Spotify has taken a very strong genre-based approach towards a lot of the brands that a lot of the IPs that it's creating. So whether it is hip hop, it's built out an IP called Rap 91. Whether it's iPop, which is this emerging genre around independent artists in India. They've sort of created iPop icons. Punjabi 101 focused on the Punjabi urban Punjabi ecosystem. So Spotify has taken a very strong view on building out intellectual properties around various genres and rallying around communities that operate in those genres. And our goal is to effectively sort of build the strategy, create various cultural objects, and deliver on those cultural objects that hopefully translate into business outcomes for that brand. So over the years, not only is our work led to a higher level of social engagement, higher volume of content, greater number of followers, and those sort of marketing KPIs that a brand manager or a marketing team at someone like a Spotify would look at, but it's also hoping to deliver at certain key business outcomes that could potentially help Spotify as a business grow, and then in turn help Kulfi grow.
You were talking about how you have noticed that, Vishal sitting in Delhi might not pay Spotify $100 to listen to Coldplay, but he will spend 35,000 rupees and go to Ahmedabad. So obviously, concert economy is big, great. Helps brands, helps artists, helps entertains people at large. Win, win, win. But what's the role? I'm just curious to know what's the role of Kulfi in all of this. Were there any activations, for example, that you guys were involved with?
So I'll break down the work that Kulfi does into broadly three buckets. Content. So all the content that we end up producing, it would be anything that sort of is a film to branded content and YouTube channels to maybe some long form content like a web show or web series. The second is community, which is essentially us engaging with various audiences, both offline and online, and managing those communities on behalf of brands. And the last is experiences, which could be digital experiences or live experiences of various scales, small and large. So work that we have done with Spotify has cut across all three areas. And what we end up doing, so say for instance, if I take an IP like Rap 91, right? A lot of the work that goes into the content that is produced for Rap 91, um, um, to a very large extent, gets managed by us or produced by us. There are cases where there may be certain events that may need to be organized, which would be certain experiences that we may need to create, which with the right kind of partners we actually sort of work with to be able to actually deliver depending on the scale. So we have certain capabilities that we can do in-house, but when it comes to certain scale, then we effectively sort of bring in the right kind of partner. And that's the way in which Kulfi as an organization is also structured, where we recognize what our strengths are. And we also have a ecosystem of extremely strong partners, not only in India, but across the world, that deliver to various pieces of work that we put together for the brands that we work with. And then community building is also another big part of the work we do. So over the years with various brands, what we've done is actually gone ahead and built those communities for them. So going at the grassroots level, trying to understand that if this particular brand wants to effectively engage in the hip hop space, so this particular brand wants to engage in the gaming space, what are the kind of communities? Where are cohorts of people with like-minded interests lying? And how can this brand then rally around building out a community for those audiences? So I would say that the work that we do is broadly in these three areas. And with Spotify, with Lego, with Crocs and several other brands that we worked with over the years, we tend to sort of cater to a permutation and combination of one of these three things or all of the above.
You were talking about communities, Advait, and
Mhm.
I'm a big aviation geek, and I spend a lot of time on online forums, with fellow enthusiasts, like Flyer Talk. And when I think about communities, I think about that. I also think about places like Reddit, for example, right? And if you think about brand focused discussions, so much of brand focused discussions happen on these, for lack of better word, dark social, right? You can't track it. I'm not sure. For example, how would you track conversations going on WhatsApp or on Reddit? I mean, there is some way to do it, but so much of that opportunity from a brand point of view, I think Reddit is a big black hole. I mean, I don't know if anybody has been able to crack it, or even for that matter, stuff happening on Discord, right?
Yeah.
You were talking about gaming, such a big community again there. Have you guys thought about all this? Like, what's the right way without? I mean, everybody does Instagram and everybody does Facebook, right? Keeping that aside, I mean, when you're talking about rich conversations and really going deep and understanding the consumer and talking to him or talking to her, where they are really connecting with the brand and talking about it.
No, absolutely. I think we do highly recommend that brands sort of move beyond just the traditional platforms to, places where actually conversations happen, right? And those conversations can be anywhere. Sometimes those conversations can be uh, attributed to the work that the brand is doing, and sometimes they may not be. So there are challenges, like you said, that you cannot track every single conversation, and I think that is also fine, right? It's about making sure that the brand is authentically showing up in the right places, because then they sort of also experience dividends in various ways, right? I think one of the things that we are trying to sort of also bridge a gap around is IRL to URL and URL to IRL, right? Like, so how do you actually take people from online ecosystems into an offline space, and then from offline spaces back online into conversations, right? Because the long tail of the conversation will happen online, but the short head of the conversation will happen offline, right? So that's where I think that there are opportunities where you actually not even are now dealing with a user ID. You're actually dealing with a face. You're dealing with a person. You're dealing with, like, an individual when you're actually engaging with them offline. So we are actually big on the fact that I think brands increasingly offline is the new social, and brands need to increasingly sort of spend time, over there to effectively try and engage with audiences more deeply and be able to then track, where that can sort of manifest. But you're right, it's not easy. However, it is important. And what we feel is that as long as brands can, if they do truly intend to be culturally relevant and they do truly have those ambitions, then it is very important that they need to be where and show up where the conversations are actually happening. Because all said and done, culture, and I think that this is like now quite a well-known adage. The culture is not sort of shaped by brands. Brands just participate in culture, right? People create culture, and brands need to realize that where those waves exist and how they can potentially ride them. So what we're doing is we're just effectively trying to identify those opportunities. Some could be easily tracked, some may not be tracked, but as long as eventually we can find ways to be able to try and translate that into the bottom line in some shape and form, we believe that we can add value.
Got it. And I think that's where your the entire pitch of experiences also comes into play, right?
Exactly.
Where you're much closer to the consumer and sitting next or standing next to them.
Yeah.
In an era where holding companies are consolidating to save margins, does the future of the AOR belong to the generalist agency, according to you, that manages the brand, or collectives like yours that own specialized craft?
At least from what the reading of the market is in terms of where things are heading, we're starting to see that we've probably come to a stage where a marketing manager or a CMO is dealing with way too many different partners, and there is a need to consolidate. So, on the one hand, I do believe that consolidation is going to be an opportunity and a trend. That there is going to be merit in being able to offer a integrated suite of solutions. Um, However, um, collectives have a unique ability to be able to bring the right kind of specialists on board as needed, right? So I think that I don't see these two things as mutually exclusive things. What I mean by that is that while you do not need everyone in your payroll in order for you to be able to offer a particular integrated solution to a brand, you can always function with a model where you have a wide pool of specialists that can be available to you as needed. I do believe that brands in general would prefer one partner that has a wider suite of solutions. So it's a little bit of both. It's not necessarily one over the other. And I think that the model is more focused on trying to leverage the best of having specialists that you can bring on board as needed, while at the same time offering a full suite of solutions so that a brand does not have to deal with those independent specialists every single time.
Kulfi's visible client roster reads heavily new economy or global. You have Spotify, Netflix, Crocs, Nothing, Lego. Is the traditional FMCG or the legacy Indian advertiser open to what you're building? Have you stopped chasing that category, Advait?
So the journey with how we built our roster has been fairly organic, but you're right, it sort of attracted a certain kind of brand. For us, our positioning, our focus has always been around cultural relevance. So we want to work with brands that believe in building in culture, right? And whether that is an FMCG large traditional brand that believes that cultural relevance is going to be their potential moat, or it is a young consumer technology company or an upstart like D2C brand. For us, as long as the ambition is to effectively build in culture and harness the power of culture to effectively sort of grow the brand, those are the kind of brands that we want to really work with. But yes, it's kind of organically sort of moved towards a certain kind of brand. Because what we've realized is that a lot of the consumer technology companies that have sort of built in India over the last few years have taken a one size fits all approach towards the market, and have also very quickly realized that that approach is not necessarily a good one. A country like India is actually 20 markets within a market. Even though it may not be a very big portion of their overall P&L as a US company or a European company, they know that it's a big growth center and they need to sort of focus on it, but they also need to treat it with a great deal of nuance. And that is where I think people have seen value in working with a Kulfi, because that collective nature of what I was telling you about, which is how do you authentically bring people from Gujarat or bring people that understand the cultural nuance of Haryana or of Telangana, and actually sort of create content, build out experiences, um, create or put together communities that authentically represent those audiences. I think that is really what we've been able to deliver on with a lot of these global consumer technology brands. But that being said, yes, while it has happened a little organically, the intention is to just work with people who want to build in culture. And if that comes down to a large FMCG brand as well, yeah, we'd love to try and sort of solve those business problems for them too.
The agency I work for is called Popcorn. It's a
Mhm.
tasty name. The agency you have built is called Kulfi. It's another tasty name. Tell me, I love the name. Tell me, how did that name came about?
So we've always been very big on names. As you may probably know through our journey as Supari Studios and then Post Office and Kida and now Kulfi. Um, it's always meant to represent a certain kind of feeling.
Hmm.
Supari was created with the intention of, um, since we were a content studio and we were in the business of shooting people, we basically started calling ourselves Supari because we were basically taking Supari to shoot people. So that was how the name arose. Post Office was our post production and animation division. So because we were doing a lot of post work, we called it Post Office. And then Kida was the place where the Kida happened. Was original long form innovation sort of division. Kulfi actually is a representation of a feeling. Um, Kulfi is one of those things you can't say without smiling, literally and figuratively. So if you say Kulfi, you actually have to smile and say it. You cannot just say, Kulfi. So it's like saying cheese. And since we are in the business of telling stories that make people smile, we decided to call ourselves Kulfi.
Fantastic. You've built branded IPs for Red Bull and CRED, but the real holy grail is owned IP, right? That does not depend on a client's media budget. Are you ready to move from fee for service to co owning or royalty sharing an IP? And the client, the Indian client, um, are they mature enough, in your opinion, for that conversation yet?
That's a good and very interesting question. So I think that like we have struggled with building out our own IP over the years, because what we've also realized is that there are IP, and building out IP is a beast in itself. It requires a certain level of focus and resources, which as a bootstrapped entity that is offering a service for trading our skills for as a service is obviously challenging. So we did try, and I have to say humbly that haven't been very, very successful at building out our own IP in the past. But now we are taking a slightly different strategy, which is more in line with what you mentioned, which is co-owning IP and co-building IP. So that is something that we are actually in the process of doing. We, I think, have been able to show some level of success with building IP entirely for a brand. And now what we want to try and do is saying that how can we take this capability stack and do this alongside someone. So for us, we were on either end of the spectrum. Either we build it as a service and create it for a brand entirely, or we build it completely on our own. But we feel that there is now some sort of room in between, and that is something that we are exploring as we speak. And I think that there is a certain level of maturity, there is a certain level of understanding, there is a certain level of depth that brands today have when it comes to sort of co-building IP, especially amongst startup brands. So we see that like younger founder-led brands do recognize the fact that collaboration is a way to go, and there could be opportunities to effectively find the right kind of partners to be able to co-build IP. and be able to deliver on outcomes that can be beneficial for all the parties involved. So we are actually seeing traction on those fronts. Also, we are in a time in India when the consumer ecosystem, the consumer brand ecosystem has really sort of exploded in the last 5 years, just because of the infrastructure that has also been developed to support it. So now you have a lot more younger founders, you have a lot more younger companies, you have a lot more creative ambition to be able to actually build a brand and find the right kind of partners to do that. So that's an ecosystem that we're exploring. We may not, a large brand with global policies and guardrails may not be in a position to work with this tiny little like studio out of Bombay and co-own an IP. However, a much younger, ambitious, D2C brand that is sort of emerging out of Bangalore or Bombay or Delhi or wherever may actually see that ambition. And those are the kind of people that we're effectively uh, having conversations with for this potential opportunity in the years to come.
And you were just talking about infra and ecosystem for the young founders. This is a good segue. You look at the Q-commerce ecosystem, which in so many ways has enabled so many new brands to come up, right? And reach out to consumers directly. But what it has also done, it has turned, they are now literally in so many ways media platforms also, right?
Yep.
And budgets, I've seen myself how some budgets have migrated from storytelling to shelf space, right?
Right.
How do studios stay relevant?
And this is not, obviously, it's not enough time that we sort of spent together, but at least like studying like previous decades in advertising and the current space that we're in, I feel like budgets are actually not shrinking. It's just that they're being reallocated in different places. And they're being allocated in places where the conversations are happening. They're being allocated in places where there is the most attention. And if you can sort of identify where that is, then you can really find opportunities. So it could be, you know, um, a tiny JPEG image on a quick commerce platform, or it could be, an Instagram reel, or it could even be, IPL for that matter. It really sort of boils down to where the attention is moving, and naturally, that is where the capital will move as well. So for us, I think our goal around relevance is to try and keep staying ahead about around where the conversations happen, right? And trying to make sure that we are delivering. Like, I mean, if you notice the last, especially post-pandemic, there's been a huge level of investment in live experiences in the country, right? Because that's where time and attention and money is being spent. And people have recognized that, brands have recognized that, and now brands are also jumping into the extent where now artists are coming and we're canceling shows because we've reached this sort of saturation point because the infrastructure is not developed enough to be able to support it, right? So I think, and we started seeing that pretty early on. So we built out our experiences division back in 2022 when we realized that there is going to be this like upsurge in activity. So I think that like it really sort of boils down to sort of see where things are moving, and the amount of money being spent in these areas is actually not falling. It's growing. It's just that you need to know where it's being spent, right? And that's something that we are also increasingly spending our focus on to try and identify what are those opportunities and be able to make sure that we stay relevant over there with the right kind of solutions.
I was reading you work with about 300 odd creators. Is that the right number, correct, currently?
Yes, but
Or
we
is
do
that
take
a
a fairly broad view on the definition of what we call a creator. So a creator is not necessarily an influencer, but it could be a creative as well. So designers, animators, directors, writers all fall under the larger umbrella of what we define as a creator.
fair enough? Though my question is more about influencers in general, right?
Yeah.
The campaigns at least I've been involved with, it's very transactional. this is your brief, this is your brand, you have to post this. Once you do the post, here's your fee. Okay, all right, goodbye, tata. We've been talking a lot about building IPs. Is there any thought about coning an IP with an influencer? As far as Kulfi is concerned, have you guys thought about that?
Yeah, absolutely. We have and are considering it actively in terms of how do we actually sort of build it out. I think when we take a fairly broad definition on not just the word creator, we take a fairly broad definition on the word brand as well, right? So you have enterprise brands like, the Spotify's and Legos of the world. You have startup brands like the Mokobaras and I mean, maybe not Mokobara anymore, but like whatever younger brands that have sort of launched in the more recent years. And then you have individual brands, right? That are effectively now, as we sort of call influencers, right? I think that like there's an opportunity, especially in the two categories of startup brands and individual brands. There's definitely an opportunity to co-build IP, right? Enterprise brands, I think, is still going to be harder just because of the kind of like legacy that they have, right? There will be some that will still be open to it. Like I know for a fact that like globally Lego is investing heavily in IP, right? But is it going to co-build or co-own IP? Possibly, but maybe with like another enterprise brand, right? However, like with in India, I think that the opportunities with the individual brands and the startup brand ecosystem is definitely rife, and that's something that we as an organization I think have the OCAR to actually do work with. So that's something that we're looking at. And yes, long story short, there is intention, and hopefully in the coming months there will be some examples of that we'll be able to share with you guys as well.
When a brand asks you to justify, let's say, a 2 crore content spend, not in views or reach, but in actual business impact, how do you answer that? Has the industry cracked measurement, um, or are we just getting more sophisticated at describing the problem?
We haven't. The honest answer is that it's still a struggle, but I think we are getting better at it and we are getting closer at it. And I think that it's very important that we solve for it because if we don't, I feel like that is where there is going to be a massive erosion of the value of the work that we do. So the closer we can get to being able to attribute our work to um, a clear business outcome, the better. And for us, we've picked, two things that are at far ends of the spectrum, culture on one side and business on the other. And we are trying to sort of talk about how cultural relevance is good for business, right? So how do we actually bring those two worlds together? And attributing cultural relevance to business is not easy, but our goal is to effectively try and get there. And the funny thing is that it's not like as if we aren't aware of this at scale, right? Like, so you take a Nike or you take an Apple or you take a Lego even, right? These are brands that have become relevant in culture and have been able to stand the test of time through the cultural relevance strategies that they've adopted. However, how do you really attribute that in terms of value, right? And how do you really sort of link that? So I think that like we are getting to a stage and scale where we can collect a large volume of data that can help us make better attributions towards business outcomes of the work that we're doing. And that is something that I think is the need of the hour. I feel that the business model of creativity can only be can only sort of be well defined if it can translate into achieving better creative outcomes or business outcomes for the brands that it serves.
Your best creators can now pick up AI tools and set up a solo agency overnight, right? And they effectively become competitors in some way. How do you I'm curious to know, how do you manage what some people are calling the independence tax, and does the collective model actually solve for talent retention, or yeah, does it solve it?
So let me break that up into two parts, right? One is that the creator ecosystem that we work with right now, we work in the form of a collective, right? So we aren't exclusively attached to them. So we do initially already recognize the fact that they are um, collaborators, and we want to align on like a larger goal, which is potentially how do we, just do some great work that can effectively sort of be remembered, be referenced, be remixed over a period of time, right? So the way in which we do it is align with a potential collaborator on what they are most excited about, what we are most excited about, and actually sort of go and work. So we don't actually see them starting their own agencies or anything as a threat, because we actually see that, okay, fine, now they've got even more infrastructure to be able to actually help us achieve that outcome and support that. So for us, collaboration has been very critical in terms of that creator ecosystem. But coming back to the second part of your question, which is how do you actually excite and retain talent in general? And I think that applies to whether you're having someone who works full time with you, exclusively with you, as maybe a creative director or a strategist, or it could be someone who could be a potential collaborator with you as well. And I think that it's fundamental to one thing, and that is alignment, right? If um, you and they share the same goals in terms of what you want to achieve, and you can potentially deliver on that goal and promise over and over again. And it's not an easy answer. It's not like as if you can do that every single time. It does take a lot of effort to do so. I think that is the best way in which you can actually attract and retain talent, right? So for us, we spend a lot of time trying to understand with any talent, whether it's a collaborator or a full-time resource, really what their goals are. And we try and see how our infrastructure and ecosystem that we have developed over the years can help support those goals. And if those goals are aligned to our goals, right? And sometimes they aren't. And that's totally fine too. And that's when, we do recognize that and we say, okay, fine, maybe we should not be working together because you have very different goals from what we do. But if they are, then we do everything in our capacity to try and sort of make that a reality, because that reinforces them to want to have to work more, because they're getting closer to what they want and we are getting closer to what we want, and therefore there's a mutual interest and excitement to be able to work together. So I think really it sounds simple. It's obviously much harder in practice, but as long as you can just facilitate as much alignment when it comes to like a creator or a full-time resources goals with your goals, I think that's where the magic lies.
If AI led search means consumers are getting answers without ever seeing an ad or visiting a website, what does brand building actually look like in 2027? Are we marketing to algorithms now and not humans?
I think as long as humans exist, there will always be room for emotion. So I'm an eternal optimist where that is concerned. That's not changing anytime soon. I feel that what happens every time we experience a sort of huge upsurge or leap of technology is our behavior shift, and the way we behave around brands, our values, our beliefs about certain things, those evolve. That is where culture exists, right? Culture, if you really sort of broadly define it, is just a function of shared values, beliefs, and behaviors, right? Like that's fundamentally what culture is. And if you can sort of get a sense of where culture is moving, if you can get a sense of where behaviors are shifting, if you can get a sense of like what value systems are we going to still retain, I think that there is always going to be room for us to be able to identify opportunities for where brands can exist over there. So we are essentially students of that, right? We are students of trying to identify where is the puck moving, where are things sort of shifting, and um, yes, tools will always be tools in terms of being able to help us rationalize and make faster decisions, better decisions, and so on and so forth. But I think that like humans inherently are still humans, and that's not going anywhere. So as long as humans exist, I don't think that like rational thing, emotional emotions are going anywhere. And I feel that the opportunity for brand is going to probably surface even more, because now what we're just going to see is just a new order of how advertising is going to happen, right? We're going to just see a new order of how brand building is going to happen, because you're going to have this AI slop and you're going to have like this entire sort of ecosystem that will just get optimized. So You do see an ad on Google when you search on Google, but now you've sort of familiarized yourself with the behavior around that. And do you take that recommendation or you not take that recommendation is up to you, right? The same thing's going to happen with ChatGPT as well eventually, right? When you go in, you will decide whether you want to or not take that recommendation. I think fundamentally it'll boil down to how our behavior shift and what kind of role the brand is playing in that person's life around that. So it may not be advertising that we see it the way we may not be advertising in the shape and form that we see it today. It might be a completely different form of brand building. But I still feel that like it will probably just as long as find its way to be able to play a meaningful role in that human's life, I think that then there will be preference over another brand.
5 years from now, okay, what's the version of this business you'd be proud to have built?
I think the vision right now for the company is to build out an infrastructure on which we can build brands and culture. It's been a we've many of us have been inspired to join this company and build this company on the basis of what culture has sort of how culture has impacted us. It could be a movie or an artist or a film or some music that really sort of inspired us to really sort of get into this business. And we are hoping that we can create some version of that as a business ourselves as well. Create these cultural objects that essentially, the next generation of people effectively are inspired by. So I think for us, what we want to do is create an infrastructure for on which brands can really build in culture, be known for that not only in India but across the world, and hopefully, become some version of a reference for future generations.
Awesome. My final question, Advait. Do you have any podcast or book recommendations for our listeners?
Bunch. Book recommendations. One of my favorite books of all time is Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull. I think it is this. It's one of the books that really inspired me as a creative entrepreneur and the journey. Ed Catmull is the president of Pixar. It talks about the entire biography and a story of how they built Pixar back in the 90s. Interestingly, Pixar also started as a company that used to make ads and then moved into making Toy Story, which was their first animated feature, which then exploded and then turned the company into the behemoth that it is. Creative Confidence is another book that is a big I'm a big fan of. It's a book about how all of us are inherently creative and have the ability to solve problems in interesting ways. And how do we acquire the confidence to do that? That's by David Kelly and Tom Kelly, the founders of IDEO, and also the people that run Stanford's D School or Stanford University in Palo Alto. Um, Podcast recommendations. Acquired is obviously a big podcast. I'm a big fan of Acquired as a podcast. It requires a great deal of investment of time, but the storytelling and the depth at which and the rigor with which they actually sort of study companies. They've studied the story of Nike and they've studied the story of Spotify and Louis Vuitton and several companies. I think it's a really good way to understand the nuts and bolts of a business, and really sort of helps you identify how these brands have been built. So Acquired is definitely one that I'm a big fan of. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Advait, for being a part of this special milestone episode of the Indian Ad Geek. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Vishal. Yeah, looking forward to hearing the episode.
Advait, you have given this Silver Jubilee episode exactly the flavor it deserved. Kulfi Collective, for me, represents something really important in Indian advertising right now. Proof that you don't need to be a network agency to do work that actually moves people. You just need to understand the people. To everyone who's been with us since episode 1, thank you. To everyone who just walked in at 25, welcome. You picked a good one to start with. Next week, episode 69 of the Indian App Geek will feature Seth Miller, one of the foremost global voices on passenger experience, and we'll be talking about AIX Hamburg. If you've enjoyed this episode, hit subscribe, leave us a review, drop a rating, and share it with someone who might enjoy it. The Indian Ad Geek streams on all major podcast apps. I'm active on social everywhere. Hit me up with your feedback at Vishal One Mehra. Until next time, keep your creative antennas tuned and your Ad Geek flag flying high. Stay quirky, stay curious, and keep geeking out.